Welcome to today's deep dive. We're really glad you're joining us because, to be completely transparent with you, the information sitting in front of us right now is, well, it's incredibly pressing.
It really is.
Yeah. We're going to be focusing all our attention today on a highly critical intelligence document. It's the March 9, 2026 Daily Intel Brief from Ping AI. And I need to set the stakes right at the top here.
Right.
We are looking at day 10 of a major historic Iran-U.S. escalation. According to the data pouring into this brief, the global security landscape hasn't just shifted, it has sharply deteriorated in literally just the last 24 hours.
Yeah, it is a profoundly sobering document to digest. When you spend your life tracking global stability, you look for long-term patterns, sure, but you also monitor for sudden spikes in volatility. And what this specific brief shows us is a massive multi-regional spike. The headlines you might be seeing on your feeds today are understandably alarming, but our goal in this deep dive is to step back from the panic a bit.
Exactly. We want to help you understand exactly why this is happening right now.
Right, the underlying mechanics of the conflict. And more importantly, how all these seemingly isolated pieces actually connect to one another across the globe.
And, I mean, the sheer volume of what is happening all at once is just staggering. I'm looking at the executive summary of this Ping AI dashboard right now, and it is actively monitoring 40 distinct events.
40.
Across 36 different live data feeds. We were talking about 29 active conflict incidents happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
All flashing red, all signaling a heightened risk of a much broader war. It's a mix of awe and, frankly, intense gravity, just trying to process the sheer scale of the data. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right.
Because to make any sense of the global shockwaves, we really need to understand the epicenter of this crisis first.
I completely agree. We have to start with the direct kinetic confrontation happening in the Gulf.
The engine driving the whole thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the engine that is currently driving the entire global crisis. For a very long time, the conflict between the United States and Iran has been defined by proxy warfare.
Shadow boxing.
Right. It was essentially shadow boxing. Iran would utilize allied groups throughout the Middle East to exert pressure, and the U.S. would respond in kind. But the intelligence brief we're looking at today makes it unequivocally clear that we have moved entirely past that phase.
We are now looking at open, direct, state-on-state warfare.
We are.
And the geography of this assault is breathtaking. The brief details a massive multi-vector assault launched directly by Iran. They aren't aiming at proxies, and they aren't using proxies to do the firing.
No, they're not.
They are using a combination of their own Shahed drones and ballistic missiles to target U.S. assets and Gulf allies directly. Just looking at the list here.
It's extensive.
It is. They hit the U.S. naval support activity in Bahrain. They hit Kuwait's Camp Arifjan, causing what the intel calls heavy damage.
Right.
They hit the Kuwait International Airport fuel depots, sparking a massive fire. There are even explosions being reported near the Dubai airport from suspected Iranian drones.
And active interceptions happening in the skies over the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar.
Yeah. Can you walk us through what hitting these specific targets actually means strategically?
When you look at that specific list of targets, you're looking at the foundational architecture of U.S. and allied security in the Middle East. Let's take Bahrain, for example.
Okay.
Hitting the U.S. naval support activity, there is a profound escalation because that is the headquarters of the U.S. Fifth Fleet.
Wow.
It's a direct strike on the central nervous system of American naval power in the region. And the methodology here, what the brief calls a multi-vector assault, is highly calculated.
How so?
Well, they're sending swarms of Shahed drones flying low and slow, coordinated perfectly with high-speed ballistic missiles coming in from the upper atmosphere.
So they're mixing the speeds and altitude.
Exactly. That specific combination is designed to mathematically overwhelm sophisticated air defense systems. The radar gets saturated by the slow drones, leaving gaps for the ballistic missiles to punch through.
And unfortunately, those missiles did punch through. The brief confirms that these strikes were not just property damage or posturing. The human toll here is devastating. At Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, the intelligence confirms that 6 U.S. soldiers were killed.
And the brief also makes a point to note that the U.S. is actively denying claims coming out of Tehran that U.S. soldiers were captured during the chaos.
Right, but the 6 fatalities are hard confirmed. On top of that, 2 more soldiers were killed at the Kuwait airport during that strike on the fuel depots.
The human cost is a tragedy. And from a purely strategic standpoint, it is exactly the threshold that triggers an immediate, massive military response.
The United States can't let state-sponsored strikes of that magnitude resulting in American casualties go unanswered.
They absolutely cannot. The intelligence brief outlines the scale of that counterstrike by U.S. forces in the Gulf. The result of these direct open water clashes was the destruction of 42 Iranian naval vessels.
Wait, 42 vessels in a single day?
In a single day.
Sinking 42 ships sounds like something out of World War II. How is a naval battle of that scale even possible in such a condensed time frame without triggering an immediate total regional collapse?
What's fascinating here is how fundamentally this alters the geopolitical calculus and the tactical reality of the Gulf.
Right.
To understand how 42 ships go down so quickly, you have to understand Iran's naval doctrine. A large part of Iran's naval strategy relies on asymmetric warfare.
So they aren't using traditional warships.
No, they don't typically field massive traditional blue water warships like cruisers or destroyers to go toe-to-toe with the U.S. Navy. Instead, they use swarm tactics.
Right.
They deploy dozens, sometimes hundreds, of smaller, highly maneuverable fast-attack craft. These are heavily armed speedboats equipped with anti-ship missiles, torpedoes, or heavy machine guns.
Like a hive of angry bees.
Precisely. The goal is to swarm a larger vessel, overwhelming its close-in weapon systems.
So the U.S. essentially wiped out a massive portion of that swarm capability in one fell swoop.
They did. When the U.S. retaliated, they likely utilized their own air superiority attack helicopters, fighter jets, and precision-guided munitions from their destroyers to systematically dismantle those fast attack squadrons.
And taking 42 of those vessels off the board in 24 hours is a massive blow to Iran's ability to project power or threaten shipping lanes in the immediate term.
Huge blow. But zooming out, it confirms that the old unwritten red lines of this conflict have completely evaporated. Sinking a nation's naval fleet, even a fleet of fast attack craft, is undeniable kinetic state-on-state action.
It really feels like a point of no return. But understand how we got to day 10 of this massive escalation and why the violence has reached this fever pitch where 42 ships are sinking and ISIS are burning. We have to look back at an event the Intel brief highlights as a critical catalyst.
We do.
And I want to be very clear with you as we discuss this next piece.
Yeah.
Our job here is to look at the facts exactly as they are reported in this intelligence brief without taking any political sides.
Absolutely.
We are simply examining the mechanics of how this conflict is escalating and the data points driving it.
That is a vital distinction to make. The reality of modern war is incredibly complex, and the narratives surrounding civilian casualties are often just as potent, if not more so, than the weapons themselves.
They become the fuel that sustains the conflict.
Exactly.
Right. So the brief points us back to February 28th, to a highly sensitive and deeply tragic event that set the stage for what we are seeing today.
In Manab.
Yes, a U.S. airstrike took place in Manab, Iran. The intended target was a military site, specifically an IRGC Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps naval base.
Right.
But adjacent to that military target was the Shajara Taiba Girls' School. According to reports cited in the brief from the New York Times and the Washington Post, that strike resulted in 175 deaths.
And the majority of those killed were children.
Yes.
From an analytical standpoint, understanding the fallout from this event is central to understanding the absolute fury of the current escalation.
How so?
Well, in the clinical, often grim terminology of military planners, this is referred to as collateral damage. But to the people on the ground, to the families, and critically, to Iranian hardliners, it is an undeniable rallying cry.
Right. It changes the entire domestic political landscape.
Completely. The intelligence brief explicitly notes that the collateral damage narrative surrounding this specific event in Manab is being utilized to galvanize those hardliners.
To justify the massive direct reprisals we are seeing now on day 10.
Exactly.
It just highlights a terrifying reality of what the brief calls hybrid threats. You have these major military assets like an IRGC naval base situated directly next to or embedded within civilian infrastructure like a school.
It's a very common tactic.
But it makes the concept of precision targeting seem almost impossible.
It presents a virtually unsolvable dilemma in modern warfare. When an adversary embeds critical military infrastructure within civilian populations, any kinetic action, no matter how precise the munition is, carries an extreme risk of catastrophic civilian loss.
Because blast radiuses are unforgiving.
They are. And when that loss occurs, especially on the scale of 175 casualties, it acts as an extreme accelerant to the conflict. It completely removes the political space for de-escalation.
Meaning nobody can back down.
Right. Any leader within Iran who might quietly want to negotiate a ceasefire or step back from the brink is completely drowned out by public and political demands for overwhelming retribution.
And that's what's so vital for you to understand when looking at the trajectory of this brief. The sheer devastation of an event like the MENAB strike fuels this endless, horrific loop of retaliation.
It's a cycle.
You have an airstrike, a tragic loss of civilian life. The hardliners demand retribution. They launch multi-vector missile strikes on the Fifth Fleet headquarters. U.S. soldiers are killed. The U.S. sinks 42 ships in response.
And the cycle just spins faster and faster.
De-escalation feels entirely out of reach when the human toll is anchoring the decision-making.
Which brings us to perhaps the most alarming section of the entire Ping AI brief. Because while this cycle of conventional retaliation is spinning out of control in the waters and skies of the Gulf, the shadow war has simultaneously escalated into the nuclear realm.
This is where the stakes go from regional to potentially existential.
Truly.
The brief cites a report from TASS stating that the Isfahan nuclear facility in Iran has suffered serious damage following a preemptive U.S.-Israeli attack.
Right.
Now, the crucial detail here, the one piece of good news in this section, if you can call it that, is that there are no radioactive leaks reported at this time.
That is a major relief.
But stepping back, why would the U.S. and Israel choose this exact moment of peak volatility to launch a preemptive strike on a nuclear site?
Sure.
Doesn't that just pour gasoline on the fire?
It is an incredibly high-risk maneuver, but it stems from a concept known as nuclear latency, or the dash to weaponization.
Okay, break that down for us.
So, Isfahan is a cornerstone of Iran's nuclear program. Historically, Iran has relied heavily on its network of proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militias in Iraq and Syria as their primary deterrent.
That was their shield.
It was their safety net against direct attack. But with direct war now breaking out and their conventional naval forces taking massive hits, that proxy safety net is failing.
Right.
The intelligence brief warns that in this state of vulnerability, Tehran might feel backed into a corner.
So the logic is, if they feel they're losing the conventional war, they might rush to build a nuclear weapon as their ultimate life insurance policy.
Exactly. If they feel their conventional forces cannot protect the regime, they may decide that acquiring a nuclear weapon as quickly as possible is their only guarantee of survival.
And the strike is to prevent that.
A preemptive strike on Isfahan indicates that the U.S. and Israel perceive this threat of an Iranian dash to weaponization to be imminent, or at least an unacceptable risk to leave on the table during a broader war. They are trying to physically degrade the infrastructure before Iran can make that dash.
And the brief mentions that the entire world will be watching the upcoming IAEA inspections, the International Atomic Energy Agency, very closely to monitor for any sudden spikes in Iranian uranium enrichment level.
It's going to be a tense waiting game.
But as if the nuclear angle wasn't complex enough, the brief introduces a terrifying new wrinkle into this confrontation. And this represents a massive shift in the global balance of power.
It certainly does.
According to U.S. officials via OSINT and reporting from the Washington Post, Russia is now actively providing Iran with real-time targeting intelligence. I want to pause on the term OSINT really quickly for those who might not track this closely.
Certainly. OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence. It basically means intelligence agencies and analysts are piecing this picture together, not necessarily from spies on the ground, but from publicly available data.
Like commercial satellite imagery.
Exactly. Commercial satellite imagery, intercepted, unencrypted communications, and flight tracking data. And what that OSINT is revealing here is highly concerning.
Right, because the brief says Russia isn't just offering moral support. They are feeding Iran the real-time locations of U.S. ships and aircraft in the Middle East. Let's think about the practical reality of that.
It's a game changer.
It's one thing to know a U.S. destroyer is generally in the Persian Gulf. It's an entirely different thing to have a live feed saying, the destroyer is exactly at these coordinates moving at 20 knots on this heading.
Yeah.
It's like playing a game of Battleship where your opponent is looking at a live video feed of your board.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this intelligence sharing fundamentally alters the battlefield.
How so?
The United States military relies heavily on maneuverability, stealth, and operational security to protect its multi-billion-dollar assets. A U.S. aircraft carrier is incredibly powerful, but its primary defense is not getting hit in the first place by constantly moving and projecting a massive defensive umbrella.
Right, they're hard to find.
Usually, yes. But if Russia's highly advanced military satellite network and intelligence apparatus are constantly feeding precise, real-time coordinates directly to Iranian ballistic missile batteries, the U.S. loses the vital advantage of evasion.
It effectively acts as a force multiplier for Iran's missile program.
Dramatically so. Iran has a massive stockpile of missiles, but their indigenous targeting capabilities have historical limitations. By plugging into Russia's intelligence grid, Iran's weapons suddenly become vastly more lethal.
It makes U.S. force protection incredibly complicated and dangerous.
Extremely dangerous.
And the brief notes that this signals a much deeper, entrenched Russo-Iranian military alliance. It's moving past a transactional relationship where Iran sells Russia drones for use in Ukraine.
It's bordering on joint operations against American forces.
Which begs a really uncomfortable question. If the U.S. decides it has to retaliate further to protect its sailors, or goes after these Iranian missile sites more aggressively, what is the risk that we cross wires with Russian assets and trigger direct Russian involvement?
It is a risk that is climbing by the hour. Russia is clearly utilizing this Gulf conflict strategically.
By distracting the U.S.?
Exactly. By empowering Iran, they tie down massive amounts of U.S. military resources, political capital, and public attention, which directly benefits Russia's own strategic goals in places like Ukraine.
Right.
But by crossing the threshold into actively aiding in the kinetic targeting of American soldiers and sailors, Russia is walking right up to the very razor's edge of direct confrontation with the United States. It's a high-stakes gamble that assumes the U.S. is too bogged down to respond to Moscow directly.
Okay, so we've established the kinetic war on the water, the tragic civilian casualties fueling the endless retaliation loop, the nuclear stakes at Isfahan, and this deeply concerning Russian intelligence alliance. Now, I want to pivot to the global economic fallout.
Yeah.
Because this is the core of what the brief focuses on for the broader world. And even if you are listening to this half world away from the Persian Gulf, this is where the crisis is going to hit your daily life.
Absolutely. This is the global shockwave.
The brief highlights that global markets are already reacting violently. Oil has officially spiked above $100 per barrel.
Which is a massive psychological and economic threshold.
And the primary reason cited is the severe threat to the Strait of Hormuz. I hear about the Strait of Hormuz all the time in geopolitical news, but what actually makes it so vulnerable right now?
The Strait of Hormuz is arguably the single most important geopolitical choke point in the entire world when it comes to energy architecture.
Okay.
Physically, it is a narrow waterway situated between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only a couple of miles wide.
So it's a real bottleneck.
The ultimate bottleneck. Yet, a massive percentage of the world's daily oil consumption and a huge portion of global liquefied natural gas must pass through that specific bottleneck to reach global markets.
Right. And let's visualize what is actually happening in that water right now, based on the data in this brief.
Yeah.
We just discussed a U.S. and Iran naval clash that resulted in 42 sunken Iranian ships.
Right.
We have active Shahed drone swarms buzzing the waters and ballistic missiles flying overhead toward bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. How does any commercial shipping actually function in that environment?
It simply doesn't. And that is exactly the mechanism driving the economic shock. When you combine 42 sunken ships in a confined waterway...
Which immediately become massive, unpredictable navigational hazards.
Exactly. You combine that with the constant looming threat of drone strikes and the potential for unmapped naval mines and commercial shipping halts. It isn't necessarily that a government officially closes the strait. It's that the maritime insurance markets do.
That's fascinating. So it's the accountants, not the admirals, who ultimately stop the ships.
Exactly. The global shipping industry relies on massive syndicates like Lloyd's of London to underwrite the risk of moving cargo. In a conflict zone, these insurers charge what are called war risk premiums.
Okay.
When you have active state-on-state naval combat and 42 sunken vessels in the exact lane your oil tanker needs to transit, those war risk premiums go absolutely through the roof.
It becomes financially unviable to move the oil.
Or the shipping companies simply refuse to transit the strait entirely to protect their crews and billion-dollar vessels. That immediate physical restriction in global energy supply is what drives the price of crude oil above $100 a barrel almost instantly.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We hear $100 oil and we immediately think, okay, it's going to cost me a lot more to fill up my car this week. But it's much more insidious than just pain at the gas pump, isn't it?
It goes much deeper. Energy costs are foundational to the entire modern economy. When crude oil spikes, The cost of manufacturing every single plastic good or synthetic material increases. The cost of fertilizer, which relies on natural gas, skyrockets.
Which hits the food supply.
Exactly. The cost of transporting food from a farm to a processing plant and then to your local grocery store increases. Global logistics depend on stable, predictable fuel prices.
And we don't have that right now.
No. A sustained effective closure or even a heavy restriction of the Strait of Hormuz acts as a massive regressive tax on the global economy, instantly triggering severe global inflation.
And the brief points out another massive economic shockwave that compounds this: severe aviation disruptions.
Yeah, this is critical.
The brief explicitly mentions those explosions near the Dubai airport from suspected Iranian drones and the massive fire at the Kuwait International Airport fuel depots. Dubai isn't just a tourist destination. It is one of the busiest international transit and cargo hubs on the planet.
It is a vital node in the global supply chain. When you have major commercial aviation hubs under the direct threat of drone strikes, airlines cannot risk flying passenger or cargo planes into that airspace.
So what do?
They have to reroute flights around the entire Middle East.
Which means longer flights, right?
Yes, it adds hours to flight times, which burns vastly more jet fuel. And remember that jet fuel is now incredibly expensive because of the Strait of Hormuz crisis.
It creates a cascading economic failure.
It entirely snarls global supply chains that rely on air freight for time-sensitive goods, everything from microchips to medical supplies.
The physical vulnerability of these massive infrastructure nodes like the Dubai airport and the Kuwait fuel depots vividly illustrates how a regional conflict can instantly destabilize global markets far beyond the borders of the Middle East.
Absolutely.
Looking ahead in the brief, there's a specific what to watch section, and it calls out what it terms the anticipated Gulf retaliation cycle. It notes that Gulf air defenses are going to be under immense sustained strain. We are talking about interceptors actively firing over the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar simultaneously.
It's a massive coordinated defense.
But we constantly hear about systems like the Patriot missile batteries
Yes.
or the Iron Dome in Israel. Don't these Gulf states have advanced systems to handle this?
They do have highly advanced systems, primarily purchased from the U.S., but air defense at its core is a brutal numbers game, and the math right now favors the offense.
How so?
Well, interceptor missiles, like those used in a Patriot battery, are incredibly sophisticated, heavily engineered pieces of technology. They are extraordinarily expensive, often millions of dollars per missile, and they take a long time to manufacture.
Right.
The Shahed drones that Iran is utilizing, on the other hand, are effectively flying lawnmowers packed with explosives. They are cheap, utilizing off-the-shelf commercial components, and they can be produced in massive, endless quantities.
So the strategy isn't necessarily to evade the defense, it's to bankrupt it.
Precisely. The strategy is attritional. Iran aims to exhaust the advanced air defense magazines of the Gulf states by forcing them to fire $3 million interceptors at $20,000 drones.
And eventually?
Eventually, the interceptors run out and the subsequent waves of drones and ballistic missiles hit their targets unopposed.
Wow.
The brief also highlights the expected deployments of U.S. carrier strike groups to reinforce these defenses. A carrier strike group brings immense firepower and its own advanced Aegis air defense umbrella.
So there's catch.
Yes. Moving a massive aircraft carrier into a confined, shallow space like the Persian Gulf, especially while we know Russia is feeding real-time targeting data to Iran, is a highly risky maneuver.
It puts a multi-billion-dollar asset and thousands of American sailors right into the crosshairs.
It does.
And as if the situation in the Gulf wasn't dire enough, the brief outlines how this fire is actively expanding directly into the Levant. Let's look at the Lebanon front.
The escalation there is intense.
The numbers reported here are just horrifying. The intelligence brief states there have been over 400 dead in Lebanon in just a week since Hezbollah fully entered the fray. 217 of those deaths were caused by strikes across Lebanon.
And a staggering 100-plus people were killed in just the past day alone.
The velocity of the escalation in Lebanon is deeply concerning. When you observe a casualty rate of over 100 people in a single 24-hour period, you are no longer looking at targeted skirmishes or proportional tit-for-tat exchanges across the border.
No, you are looking at a massive, systemic aerial campaign designed to degrade infrastructure and personnel on a wide scale.
The brief isolates one specific terrible incident to highlight the reality on the ground. In the Bekaa Valley, specifically in a town called Nabi Chit, A failed IDF raid left 41 civilians and 3 soldiers dead.
The intelligence reports are citing between 26 and 41 dead, but the toll is massive either way.
What does a failed raid deep in the Bekaa Valley tell us about where this is heading?
This specific incident in the Bekaa Valley is a highly critical indicator for military analysts. The Bekaa Valley is geographically further inland and has historically served as a known stronghold and a vital logistical hub for Hezbollah.
It's where supply lines from Syria filter in.
Exactly. A failed IDF raid resulting in military casualties that deep into Lebanese territory suggests that ground incursions are already being tested. They aren't just bombing from the air, they are probing the physical defenses on the ground.
So a ground war is imminent.
The intelligence analysis here points to a very high imminent risk of a full-scale ground invasion by Israel into Lebanon to physically root out Hezbollah's entrenched infrastructure.
But the brief also emphasizes the profound blowback of these operations. The heavy civilian toll, like the 41 civilians killed in Nabi Chit, is actively fueling fierce anti-Israel sentiment regionally.
Right.
And perhaps more dangerously, it's destabilizing the fragile Lebanese state itself.
Lebanon is a nation that is already dealing with profound, multi-layered political and economic crises. The state is barely functioning on a good day.
A full-scale war could break it completely.
A full-scale war, combined with this staggering level of civilian devastation, could completely fracture whatever is left of the state's institutional stability. And strategically, the more pressure Hezbollah is under and the more the Lebanese state crumbles into chaos, the more it draws in direct Iranian support.
Because Iran won't let Hezbollah fall.
Iran views Hezbollah as its crown jewel proxy. They will not let it be destroyed, which means pouring more weapons and potentially personnel into the Levant, further expanding the regional war and tying it directly back to the Gulf escalation.
It's an overwhelming picture. It feels like the entire Middle East is on a knife's edge.
It really is.
And yet, one of the most remarkable things about this Ping AI brief is that it forces us to remember that the rest of the world hasn't paused. The globe is still turning, and it is still burning.
The geopolitical landscape is incredibly volatile right now.
While the world's eyes are glued to the sinking ships in the Gulf and the bombings in Lebanon, there are unrelenting global crises raging simultaneously. Let's transition to the global overview, and I want to start with Europe, because I'm noticing a terrifying thematic link here. We've been talking about drone swarms, overwhelming defenses in the Middle East. Well, look at what is happening in Ukraine right now.
Yes. The brief details a staggering Russian barrage that utilizes that exact same warfare methodology. The intelligence reports that Russia launched an astonishing 480 drones and 29 missiles at Ukraine in a massive coordinated wave.
480 drones.
It's a massive deployment.
The sheer scale of drone warfare we are seeing across the globe right now is just hard to comprehend. It has completely democratized air superiority, and the results of this massive wave are brutal.
They are.
The brief notes a ballistic strike destroyed an apartment block in Kharkiv, killing 11 people, including 2 children, with more than 15 injured. And additional hits on residential areas in Kramatorsk killed another 11. What is the strategic intent behind a salvo of nearly 500 drones and missiles?
When analysts look at the strategic intent behind a salvo of that magnitude, they connect it directly to the looming spring offensives. As the weather warms and the ground hardens, both sides look to maneuver.
Just preparation.
Right. Russia is not just trying to terrorize the civilian population, though that is a byproduct. They are systematically attempting to cripple Ukrainian logistics behind the front lines. They are specifically targeting the energy grid and the rail infrastructure.
Why, though, specifically?
The logic is brutal but simple. If the Ukrainians don't have power to run their factories, and they don't have functional rail lines to move troops and Western ammunition to the front, they cannot launch a successful counteroffensive.
But the brief makes a very specific point about the targets that were actually hit. Hitting an apartment block in Kharkiv and residential areas in Kramatorsk. The brief states that the child casualties underscore a complete disregard for civilian shielding. It's an echo of the collateral damage we discussed in Manab, but here it feels almost punitive.
And that disregard has immediate international policy implications. The analysis in the brief predicts that this exact kind of brutal, attritional strike on civilian centers is exactly what will prompt a surge in Western and NATO support.
It forces a reaction.
When images of destroyed apartment blocks and child casualties circulate, the political pressure in Western capitals mounts. Specifically, the brief mentions this will likely accelerate the delivery and deployment of Ukrainian F-16 fighter jets and other advanced air defense arms deliveries.
The West will feel compelled to provide the tools necessary to try to counter these massive, city-leveling drone swarms. So we have drone swarms dictating the pace of war in the Gulf, and drone swarms destroying infrastructure in Ukraine. And the brief takes us to the continent of Africa, where we see the exact same deadly technology exporting yet another crisis. Let's follow this thread to Sudan.
Another tragic situation.
The intelligence reports a Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, drone strike hit a kindergarten in Kalogi in South Kordofan. The casualty numbers here are devastating. Approximately 47 people were killed, and the intelligence notes the majority were children.
It's horrific.
Help me contextualize this. We know Sudan has been tearing itself apart in a civil war, but how does this specific strike fit into the broader tactical picture there?
It's a horrific repetition of the themes we're seeing globally, adapted for a brutal civil war. To give brief context, the RSF is a paramilitary force born out of the Janjaweed militias, currently locked in a death struggle with the Sudanese armed forces for control of the country. Historically, a rebel or paramilitary force like the RSF would lack an air force. The National Army would dominate the skies. But the proliferation of cheap commercial drone technology has completely leveled the playing field. The RSF is increasingly utilizing this technology to strike civilian targets and rival strongholds from the air.
Giving them a capability they never traditionally had.
Exactly. And the analysis points out that these kinds of attacks are purposefully designed to instill terror, displacing millions of people and destroying any semblance of stability in the Horn of Africa.
It's a scorched earth tactic.
Furthermore, by destroying communities, attacking civilian infrastructure, and preventing agriculture, these warring factions are actively, purposefully worsening the famine conditions in the region.
Starvation becomes a weapon of war.
It does. It's a localized conflict with devastating historic humanitarian consequences that are only amplified and accelerated by the introduction of these cheap drone technologies.
It's just unyielding. And while new, cheap technologies are exacerbating the modern wars in Ukraine and Sudan, the brief also highlights how past atrocities continue to threaten global stability. It points to a festering, unresolved crisis in Asia.
The situation in Myanmar.
The intelligence notes that testimonies from the 2018 and 2019 atrocities against the Rohingya minority in Myanmar are resurfacing. Specifically, it cites harrowing survivor accounts from villages like Tulatoli and Chulkali. I have to ask, as someone reading an incredibly urgent March 2026 intelligence brief filled with burning oil depots and sunken ships, why are older testimonies from 2018 making it into this specific threat matrix?
It's a very astute question. You might wonder why historical data is relevant to a daily threat brief. The reason is that unresolved genocide risks are incredibly destabilizing to an entire region.
How does it connect to today?
The brief notes that the current escalating political instability and civil conflict within Myanmar today is threatening these highly vulnerable populations once again. The resurfacing of these specific pleas for safety underscores that this is a festering wound. The structural violence was never resolved.
Right.
And practically, this potential for renewed violence is putting an immense, unsustainable strain on the refugee camps in neighboring Bangladesh, which were already at the breaking point. It leaves hundreds of thousands of stateless people highly exposed to any further regional upheavals, creating a massive humanitarian fault line that could fracture at any moment.
It really paints a picture of a world stretched to its absolute physical limit. It feels like every geopolitical fault line is vibrating at once. And just to add one more stressor, even nature is piling on. The brief briefly mentions an Arctic anomaly, blizzard warnings for the Beaufort seacoasts lasting until March 11th. At first glance, it seems like a mundane weather note, but the brief highlights it to show how extreme weather poses severe logistical risks to remote operations, especially in North America.
Exactly. It is about understanding systemic friction. When the global supply chain is already panicking over $100 oil, and the Strait of Hormuz is clogged with the wreckage of 42 ships, and military logistics are stretched incredibly thin, moving munitions across Europe and the Middle East, a severe weather anomaly in the Arctic matters.
It adds pressure to an already stressed system.
It can disrupt critical remote military radar operations, delay maritime shipping over the top of the world, and freeze resource extraction. It demonstrates that every single node in the global system is currently under extreme stress. There is no slack left in the line.
It is an immense amount to take in, As we bring this back to the center and synthesize what we've covered today from this Ping AI Daily Brief, the sheer scale and interconnectedness is what truly stands out.
It's the defining feature of this crisis.
We've gone from the massive macroeconomic realities, $100 oil, a burning Gulf, and the logistical nightmare of 42 sunken ships down to the incredibly specific tactical shifts, like the intelligence sharing between Russia and Iran that's fundamentally changing how this shadow war is fought, stripping the U.S. of its stealth advantages.
And that is the true, enduring value of looking at intelligence this way. It's not just about memorizing the casualty numbers or the names of the bases. It's about understanding these deep nodes of conflict.
Connecting the dots.
Exactly. When you understand how the mechanics of a drone swarm in the Strait of Hormuz directly dictate the war risk insurance premiums in London, which in turn directly impacts the price of gas at your local station and the cost of the food on your table, or how the proliferation of cheap drone technology is fundamentally reshaping the rules of warfare simultaneously, from the famine-stricken civil war in Sudan to the frozen front lines of Ukraine. You are building a highly resilient worldview.
Which we all need right now.
This kind of deep, critical thinking is absolutely essential in an age of intense information overload. You have to be able to connect the dots to understand the actual reality of the geopolitical landscape you are living in.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. I know the material we covered today was exceptionally heavy, but being informed, understanding the how and the why behind the headlines is truly the best way to navigate an increasingly complex world.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up this session, I want to leave you with a lingering, slightly uncomfortable question to mull over. We've talked extensively about the unprecedented nature of these events. With Russia feeding real-time satellite targeting data to Iran and the exact same cheap commercial drone technology violently shaping battlefields from the kindergartens of Sudan to the apartment blocks of Ukraine and the tense waters of the Gulf. Are we still looking at a series of isolated regional conflicts? Or have we quietly crossed the threshold into a deeply interconnected global shadow war, where a single push of a button in one hemisphere instantly raises the price of survival in another?